Good evening, Oakland.
Good evening, everyone.
Wow, we really packed the house this evening. It's great to see everybody and all the energy, the enthusiasm. Let's give yourselves an applause for being here. All right. So for those who don't know me, my name is Loren Taylor. Thank you. Love you too, and we love Oakland, right? Yes. So yeah, the fact that we love Oakland, that's not a campaign slogan, that's not we don't take that lightly. Oakland is a part of who we are. An amazing place where we have produced Huey Newton, Marshawn Lynch, Dame Lillard, Kehlani, and now Alyssa Liu. So much to be proud of, so much that we create here. Bruce Lee, everybody could name someone individually and we would still have more names to name. Absolutely. So we are proud of our town, and we also know that we've been through a lot. We know that Oakland has had its fair share of challenges, and as Oakland continues on its recovery, we know that we cannot recover all on our own and that it requires partnership at the state level. And that is why we're here tonight, because who is in the governor's office, what they prioritize, who they engage and who they support, that has direct impact on whether or not Oakland's recovery is easy or whether it is significantly hard. And so it's important for us to evaluate all of the candidates that are running to lead our state, because when they prioritize Oakland, Oakland thrives, California thrives, and the world is that much better. So as you know, and as you can read in the sign right here, we have San Jose Mayor and gubernatorial candidate Matt Mahan here with us tonight. We are going to have a direct conversation. I told this team, I told Matt, this is not softball. I'm excited about the conversation. There are a number of things we align on, but excitement doesn't translate to a blank check. We still have to make sure that we're asking those questions, making sure that our values align in all the areas, and that's what we want to get into. I have a few questions that I'll be leading off with, and we will be turning it over to you. I think there are some cards being passed around to submit questions, and they're going to make their way on stage at some point. But at this point, you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from the man of the hour, so I want to bring forward San Jose Mayor and gubernatorial candidate Matt Mahan.
Thank you, Loren.
You want me on this side? Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to Oakland. I'm so excited to be here. You have a wonderful city. And it's really an honor to stand here with Loren Taylor, someone I have a tremendous amount of respect for. I've followed his career, was really excited to jump in behind him when he ran. And it doesn't matter what official title or position Loren's in, he's going to continue to bring people together to solve problems and lift up this community. He's a great man, and I'm really honored to share the stage. So I'm excited to have a conversation, and I know I was invited to give a bit of an opening speech, but I don't want to take too much time on it. I will just say I jumped into this race just 9 weeks ago. Was not the plan. I love my day job. I'm the mayor of a big city, as you know, just down the road from you, and we're making real progress on some of our biggest challenges. My wife loves her day job. She runs a high school for first-generation low-income students in Eastside San Jose. And we have two little kids, Nina and Luke, who are 8 and 6 years old, and they love their school and their soccer teams, and our life plan was not to move to Sacramento. But I did decide to jump in because we're at an inflection point in our state. We see immense economic stress for working people who can't afford the rent, can't afford the price of utility bills and gas. We see public systems that are struggling. Of course, this hostile administration in Washington is compounding our problems, but many of them, if we're being really honest, start here with our own policy decisions. And at the same time, somehow in the last 6 years, we've increased spending in our state government by 75%. in 6 years. We're spending $150 billion more this year than we were 6 years ago. And I'll just ask you, has anything gotten 75% better in the last 6 years? And it doesn't feel like it to me. And I think there's a brokenness in the system. And I don't say that because I think people are nefarious or that I'm not going to give you the easy answers that you'll get from other politicians. And frankly, part of why I jumped in was you see this rising populism on the right and the left. And we've got candidates in this race offering MAGA and offering authoritarian solutions and really easy answers that I think are not true. And you see candidates on the far left offering really easy answers like, we'll just make government a lot bigger and everything will be solved. And I don't see those as real solutions either. And both sides are feeding off of one another. And what I hope to offer in this race is what I've done as the mayor of San Jose. I'm in my 4th year, and we haven't promised the moon. We've said we'll focus on basic things that lift everybody up, that create opportunity for folks. And we'll set goals publicly, and Loren talked about accountability. We'll actually set goals on our city website and let people evaluate our progress. We'll measure, are we reducing homelessness? Are we reducing crime? Are we building more housing units or not? And those are the kinds of outcomes that matter to people. And the truth is, when you're that exposed and transparent, you're learning in public. And sometimes it's embarrassing. We had 2 years ago a year where we didn't pull one permit for multifamily market rate housing in the city of 1 million people. I was embarrassed by that. But we were transparent about it. It caused us to dramatically change our permitting and our fees. And that last year, we got over 2,000 new homes to break ground that had been stuck in the pipeline because they didn't pencil. So I guess my view of governance is there aren't easy answers. We never have enough resources. We face real trade-offs and constraints, but we can make life better. And it's vitally important that government deliver improvement in people's lives every single day. Because that's why we have government. It's there to build the services and the infrastructure to expand opportunity, to keep us safe, to create the platform for people and communities to thrive. And that's what drives me. And I do think that there are ways to solve our problems and hold our government more accountable for delivering better results in our lives. And that's what I want this campaign to be about, and I'm honored to be able to have a conversation with you about that tonight. So thank you for being here.
All right. So we're going to jump right in, but before we do, I've got a softball question for you, Matt, because I think folks might want to get to know you a little bit more. And so he was not aware of this question coming in. I know you and Sylvia don't often it's not easy to get date nights. So what is your ideal date night?
You mean other than Netflix? We're usually so exhausted, we're lucky if we get to watch a show or something together. But Sylvia is definitely my better half. We met in college. She's originally from Miami, child of immigrants, half Cuban, half Egyptian. Just the light of my life. And our ideal date night is probably having dinner and being able to talk and just reconnect. We have 2 little kids and busy jobs. We don't get a lot of time to talk for an extended period of time. In fact, we probably get interrupted about every 30 seconds at the dinner table at home with our kids. So that's kind of it, honestly. Something simple like dinner and taking a walk.
That's great. Okay, so we're going hard, and I told you there's going to be a little bit of hardball here. You've been funded by billionaires and Silicon Valley money. People in this room, some that I've talked to, want to know, are you working for us or for them? And can you give a specific example from your time as mayor where you went against a donor's interest or a powerful constituency because it was the right thing to do?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for the question. And so first of all, let me say a little more about where I come from, because that's, to me, the foundation here. I grew up in Watsonville on the central coast, a little farming town where your strawberries come from, and my family struggled. We were paycheck to paycheck most of my childhood. My sisters and I we have a lot of memories of our parents fighting about money, being very stressed out about just making the mortgage. Now, we had certain privileges many other people don't. We owned our home, so we had a little more stability than most people. We didn't have the rent going up 10% every year like so many people in our community. And I recognize the privilege I have as a white man and I had many privileges, 2 parents who loved us very much. But I know what it's like to grow up in a working class community where money is tight and public services really matter. Our public library in downtown Watsonville was our after-school program because my parents both worked long hours. My mom would pick us up at 6:30 after work and get home and start dinner, and then my dad would get home an hour after that. And thank God for the public library. I don't know what we would have done otherwise. When it was time for high school, our local public high school had a higher dropout rate than graduation rate. I got a work-study scholarship for low-income students to go to a Catholic all-boys prep school, but the only way I could access it was public buses because of how far away it was. So I know what it means for public services to work. And I know what it means when they don't work. I was a public school teacher in East Side San Jose and saw the barriers to learning. So what motivates me is to provide public services that lift people up and create opportunity. I don't think government can give you every outcome you want or can equalize all of the outcomes, but it ought to give everybody opportunity and a fair shot at being able to achieve the American dream. And for far too many Californians, that's not the case today. Now, yes, I'm the mayor of the biggest city in the Bay Area and in the heart of Silicon Valley. So it would be a little strange if the tech folks in the region were not excited about our candidacy, and they are excited because they've seen how much progress we've made in San Jose. And frankly, I do think, I'll just say to be really blunt with you, I think many of them are very worried that we're about to elect a governor who could run this state into the ground and really harm California's economy. But that doesn't mean a blank check for tech. In fact, I'm the only candidate in this race who has grappled with using technology, including AI, very closely and regulating it. We created the Gov AI Coalition in San Jose that's now 900 public agencies across the country that use policy manuals we developed, privacy and security protocols, incident response plans, vendor registries and case studies. We have very strict controls on our use of technology. No facial recognition. We delete data every 30 days in many applications. We were very strict about it because, given that I'm in Silicon Valley, I know that these tools can be very powerful and deliver a lot of good. We've sped up our public buses. I also know they can be used for great harm. And we've got real risks ahead of us in terms of job loss and misinformation and manipulation, and we need a regulatory environment that protects people. So I'm clear-eyed about the risks and opportunities associated with these emerging technologies, and I would submit to you that more than any other candidate in this race, I've actually had to grapple with those issues as a public policy maker.
Great. Next question. San Jose is less than 3% black. Oakland is historically a black city that's been hollowed out by displacement. How do you govern for a community whose experience is fundamentally different from the city that you've been running? And why should this room trust you to understand Oakland's needs?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. San Jose is only 3% black, and therefore black community outcomes have not always been as front and center in San Jose as they should be and as they need to be statewide. So that is a gap. I will say, at a city of 1 million people, 3% is not nothing. I work closely with our black community and support incredible organizations that do the work of empowering our black community and investing in young people. And so I think, though, that the approach that I try to take is, number one, showing up, as we talked about tonight, and engaging with people in a two-way conversation. I don't come here tonight pretending to have all the answers to any community's challenges. Certainly not the black community, which I don't pretend to know that experience, but I'm here to listen and learn and engage. I think from a public policy perspective, an experience I do have that's very relevant is bringing what you might call an equity lens to understanding the impacts of our policies. So San Jose may not have a large black community, but it's an incredibly diverse city. We're 42% foreign born. We are incredibly diverse. And we use data to understand the disparate impacts and the gaps in who we're serving and the outcomes we're getting. And the measure of public policy does need to be whether or not it is actually reaching and empowering people. And I'll give you an example. I frankly think that it is embarrassing and unacceptable that a state like Mississippi is doing a better job of getting children on grade level for reading. In fact, right now at this moment, an African American child in Mississippi is 2.5 times more likely to be on grade level for reading than in the state of California. That's completely unacceptable. And that's where data isn't everything, but if you're not willing to disaggregate the data and understand the outcomes, including on a racial and ethnic basis, then you don't have any starting place for saying this is unjust and needs to change, and then creating accountability for fixing it. So my commitment is to show up, to listen, to build authentic relationships, just as I've done as the mayor of a very large and diverse city, and to be explicit about outcome data and use that as a measure of success. And we do that in San Jose. We have equity. In fact, one of my first budget requests as a council member was for a data equity analyst to help us understand the racial and ethnic impacts or outcomes related to different city services, because I believe it's really important to disaggregate and understand who we're helping and who we're leaving out, and then fix it when we're leaving people behind.
Great. So we thought they were going to be hardball questions, maybe not for you. No, here we go. So I look across the room and I see a few folks who are very actively engaged in addressing Oakland's homelessness challenges. And in fact, I would wager that everyone in this room, or almost everyone, has been impacted by our homelessness crisis in one way or another. Oakland's been hit hard. What specifically would Governor Mahan do differently than what Sacramento is doing right now on homelessness and encampments?
Yeah, this is such a big issue, and we've grappled with it. And I wish I could come to you and say, there's one easy answer. We just do this and we'll fix it. Far from it. And that's the reality of our toughest policy issues. We've got to be honest that there are a number of intersecting issues here. Let's start with housing affordability. For decades in the Bay Area, we have underbuilt housing relative to job growth. And that ratio is incredibly predictive of economic stress, displacement, and homelessness. And that's a public policy failure. We've created so many barriers to building housing and building affordably that we've created this incredible divide of have and have-nots. Colorado can build the exact same housing unit, a city like Denver, for half the cost of the Bay Area. And when RAND just did a study, they showed the biggest reasons wasn't the cost of land or labor, it was actually we take 2 to 3 times longer to approve housing, and we assess fees that are often 5 or 6 times higher per unit. Our fees at a local level can add 20% to the cost of a home. So we've been changing that in San Jose, but here's the tough reality. Fixing our housing market and expanding tax credits to be able to build more affordable housing efficiently and all of the other tools is a very long effort. It will take 20 years to catch up. And in the meantime, I don't believe we should leave people to suffer and die on our streets. And so in San Jose, we've taken a very pragmatic approach. And in addition to investing in affordable housing and making room and clearing the way for ADUs and reducing fees and speeding up permitting and all of those long-run solutions to making it more affordable and reducing displacement, we've also rapidly scaled up interim and transitional housing, shelter, safe parking, safe sleeping. What they all have in common is now we have thousands of places with on-site security, case management, 3 meals a day, and they're low barrier. You can bring your partner, your pets, your belongings. It's a safe place to be stabilized. We can build those at a fraction, 1/10 the cost of waiting to build a new apartment building. We can operate them for less than half the cost of the public impact of leaving someone outside in a tent encampment. When you think about all the impacts on 911 and emergency rooms and trash pickup and all the rest. So we're giving people dignified alternatives to the streets. We have moved thousands of people indoors in San Jose. We have led the state in reducing unsheltered homelessness. We've collaborated with our county to create the nation's leading, you can look at the study from Notre Dame University, prevention system. We can, for $10,000 a household, stabilize and pair someone with intensive case management, prevent them from becoming homeless as a result of a difficult life experience, like a job loss or a challenge with mental health or domestic violence or another life event. And up to 4 years later, which is how long we have longitudinal data, 92% of those households remain housed and don't need ongoing public subsidy. So preventing the inflow with the kind of program we've designed in San Jose and Santa Clara County is something every county should do. And as governor, I will support but also ensure every county has a robust prevention system. Building basic dignified alternatives, shelter, interim housing, treatment, beds, and then improving the quality of outreach. And yes, using our legal tools and law enforcement when folks resist coming indoors. And let me say a word on this because it's been largely misreported in the press. In San Jose, what we have found is over 70% of people will come indoors when you offer them a dignified alternative. In some cases, 80%. But there's a subset of our homeless population so deep, chronically homeless, so deep in the throes of addiction and mental illness that what we have found we have to do is petition to get them into a drug court or a mental health court to mandate care. That doesn't mean incarceration, but it does mean intervention. And I speak from some experience, having had a family member who spent 2 years on the streets with addiction, very much unable to pull himself out of that situation. And I think it is not compassionate or progressive to leave people out there endlessly to suffer and die.
So in addition to homelessness, all of the polling and surveys of Oakland residents, public safety is at the top of the list. And so when it comes to public safety, I want to specifically ask a question. So 3 strikes law, it devastated Black and brown families for a generation, and now Prop 36 is expanding criminal penalties. Oakland needs safer streets. I think everyone agrees on that, but we also recognize the cost of over-policing the same communities that have been over-policed for generations. How do you make sure that this doesn't become 3 Strikes 2.0? And what is your real commitment to the other side of the equation? Specifically, community violence intervention, mental health response, youth diversion, other non-police solutions that are proven to prevent crime.
You started in the right place, which is that over-policing, over-incarceration has been devastating for Black communities in particular, and you see incarceration rates at 10, 15 times, not percent, times higher than other communities. And we have to acknowledge that. And we should not go back, we cannot go back to the era of mass incarceration. And our jails and prisons should not be our de facto mental health hospitals or our drug treatment centers, as we have seen happen as we deinstitutionalize the mental health institutions and mental health hospitals, and then decriminalized and deinstitutionalized our carceral system, reduced our prison population by 35%. We then also found many people out suffering and dying on our streets. And what Prop 36 does, and it isn't perfect, but I want to share a little bit about why I supported it and how I think it can be used as a tool, and then we can talk about other interventions. Very importantly, it creates discretion at 2 levels. Number 1, the level of a DA who has to choose to even invoke it, and number 2, a judge who has to choose whether or not to employ it. But what it does is bring some balance and consequence back to our drug courts. And one of the unintended consequences of Prop 47, and I have been very supportive of and continue to stand by much of the criminal justice reform that took place over the last 10 to 15 years, for the very reasons that we've highlighted. But one of the unintended consequences is we completely eviscerated drug courts. we saw declines of people participating in drug courts of 60, 70, 80% in many counties. Because it used to be that if someone was repeatedly committing crime, was a retail theft, or I have neighborhoods where people can't use the park because they're open air drug markets and kids can't go outside. What it does at some point is create a consequence of here's your treatment pathway, or you can detox for a week in the county jail. And the amazing thing is that actually works in the vast majority of cases. And I'll tell you how we know this. Not only do we know that historically, but since Prop 36 has passed, the state hasn't funded it, most DAs haven't used it, most judges haven't used it, it's not being implemented in very many places. But the DA down in San Diego County, Summer Stephan, took it upon herself to pull together her lawyers, the public defender, the courts, the judges, and behavioral health, and create a pathway. She has today 1,000 people in treatment who would otherwise be out on the streets or dead of overdose, because she got the county aligned around providing treatment. And of all the people who she has brought Prop 36 charges under, over 96% have chosen treatment. And the alternative is, sadly, and I wish there were easier tools than that kind of coercion, but we're going to have to be honest about the nature of deep addiction. In the last 10 years, we've had 50,000 people die on our streets, half of overdose and suicide. And so we have to be able, when someone's addiction is causing them to repeatedly steal, vandalize, commit crime, and harm the community, at some point we need a forcing function. It should be as compassionate as possible, but there has to be some consequence for detoxing if you are unwilling to engage in treatment. And we're not alone in this. Western European countries do this. Many other places do this. And it's not the ideal, but I am committed as governor to ensuring that it does not lead to mass incarceration. And that's why it's discretionary, and it only works if you have a behavioral health pathway. It should not be invoked if there is not a viable treatment option for someone, which is critically important.
I'm going to take a little moderator liberty here and push a little bit further.
Yeah.
I think your response, from my perspective, solid, right on. I think when you have a policy across the state, it allows for interpretation, other folks to kind of use their bias, et cetera. Do you have any solutions for how to ensure that we are helping those who are decision makers use the tools in the right way instead of a punitive way that perpetuates the sins of the past?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So one is, and I hate to always talk about data transparency and dashboards, but you've got to publicly track, and as governor, the state can, through state agencies, play a role in actually making transparent the outcomes so that we know how it's being implemented in Alameda County versus Yolo County, which may be getting very different outcomes. And that's important for public scrutiny, for elections, for empowering the press to hold people accountable for the outcomes that we want to see. Also, in your first question, something you baked in that I didn't really reference was the importance of having really good diversion programs. And right now, there's a lot of community backlash against judicial diversion because the programs are not delivering. And so we are having judges divert people from jail, which ideally is the goal, but if the diversion program doesn't work and we see high rates of repeat offense, then you end up undermining the very policy outcome you want to get. And so we have to do more capacity building and investment in the best practices around diversion to make sure that we don't end up in situations, as we have in some places like downtown San Jose, where we're arresting somebody for the 20th time that year. That really undermines public trust in what we're trying to do with diversion. So we've got to invest in and really manage the efficacy of the diversion programs to maintain and build public trust so that we can continue to rely on them, or I think you'll see the pendulum swing much farther to the right on this issue because safety is so fundamental, and we know how it gets voters really emotionally engaged. And if we want better outcomes, we've got to prove to people that job training, drug treatment, rapid rehousing, that these things work. And so I think it's finding that pragmatic middle ground that delivers good outcomes for the individual involved, but also the broader community, so we don't lose the trust of the voters.
Thanks for going deeper there, and you absolutely do not have to apologize for data transparency, accountability, focus. It resonates with a campaign I was aware of a year ago or so. So, the next question, families, especially black families, are leaving Oakland and the state. What state level action would actually move the needle on affordability, keeping the California dream alive?
So, yeah, it's another really important question, and I'll give you a couple. Again, I don't think there's a silver bullet for this, but a couple of things. One, I won't go on on this one because I think I kind of articulated it, but the single most important thing we can do to create stability, reduce stress, create economic opportunity, and reduce displacement is to reduce barriers to building housing. However, we know that building housing, particularly market rate, also can change the nature of a neighborhood, and you can have significant displacement anyway. And so this is this tension where we need to be able to do two things at once. Our inability to build housing to keep pace with job and population growth is automatically displacing folks. And just to give you a ratio, in the Bay Area over the last 20 years, we've had job growth of 5 to 6 jobs for every one new home we've built. So we can say everything we want about not wanting luxury apartments and gentrification and all the rest, and I'm not denying that there's truth in that, but we also have to recognize when you add 6 jobs in a regional economy for every home you built, you're guaranteeing displacement. And who gets displaced? Renters, lower income residents, communities of color disproportionately. So the truth is, we have to be able to do two things at once. We have to be able to increase housing supply to keep pace with job creation at a ratio of about 2 to 1. For every 2 jobs the economy creates, you need to build a home, or you end up with cost pressures where costs go up well beyond wages and you see more displacement. The other, though, is we have to figure out how to reduce the displacement pressure. And there are a few strategies here that we've been pursuing. One that I mentioned, so one is tenant protections, and in San Jose at least, we have very robust tenant protections. I also mentioned anti-displacement efforts and legal protection for renters. I've also mentioned short-term rental subsidy. But I think that the most powerful thing we can do is increase home ownership rates. And one of the things that I would like to pursue as governor is the state stepping in to provide assistance for down payments so that a family or an individual household can buy their home with just 3% down, with the state supporting the remainder by having equity that can sit there and ultimately be repaid when the house is sold. And so you effectively create a long-term revolving fund. And so I think we need to create creative financing mechanisms for increasing home ownership rates because they dramatically lag the rest of the country. We're 10% lower than the national average in home ownership. And of course, for our African American community, dramatically lower than that. And so I think increasing home ownership rates, expanding, I'll give you one other one. The entry-level tool for home ownership, particularly if you can have a low down payment, has actually been condos. It's been small for-sale units. California doesn't build small for-sale units anymore. I don't know if you've noticed that. Everything we build is for rent. Do you know why? Construction defect liability. Our friends, the trial lawyers, no offense to any of the trial lawyers in the room, have created the most aggressive liability laws in Sacramento that mean that if you build for sale small affordable units that could be purchased to build some equity and to be insulated from those rent increases, a trial lawyer can partner with an HOA and sue you 10 years later for the paint fading. And so you can't get them financed. You can't get them insured. We've locked an entire generation of young people out of entry-level home ownership because for the last 10 plus years, we haven't been building condos. So that becomes another barrier for getting a foothold in a community like Oakland. So I've been working with Buffy Wicks and others on reforms in Sacramento to address that issue. So I don't think there's any one solution, but I think it's a number of different things that can start to reduce displacement and help people have a foothold in the communities in which they grew up.
Great. Okay, so I have one last question, and then we're going to turn it over to audience questions. And so before I do, I did want to just address the audience a little bit and point out the fact that the level of depth we're getting in these answers, if you look across the field, so when the Black Action Alliance or other organizations are emphasizing how we should be looking at our leaders, the substance, the depth, and the readiness for the role, absolutely something that should be high on that evaluation matrix. So the last question, what is your specific commitment to state procurement for small and diverse businesses? Are you committed to meeting the 25% small business and 5% micro business targets? And what's the enforcement mechanism when agencies miss? And beyond contracts, what are you actually doing, or what do you intend to do to close the credit gap and build wealth for under-resourced, historically marginalized, historically marginalized communities, so that they can participate, have real access to capital, and what are there specific dollar commitments or other policies that you would implement?
All right, so it's a great question. There's a lot in there. You might have to repeat some of the question. On the first part, yeah, absolutely committed to those procurement thresholds, the 25% and 5% that you noted. But what we found in San Jose is it's one thing to have a commitment to the threshold. It's another thing to actually empower people to go effectively navigate a procurement process. And so what we have done in San Jose is, and I think we could always do better, but I think is the beginning of a model statewide, and we probably should have a statewide capacity building team that just focuses on procurement reform. It's too slow, it's too cumbersome, there's a lot to fix there. But we have been doing workshops for small business, minority and women-owned businesses to do capacity building to help them understand up front, have a little bit more hand-holding around what our procurement priorities look like, which funding streams are available, how to be competitive, how to apply, and really demystify and simplify it for people. And when we reduce, part of the reason that I have been pushing for regulatory reform is that when we keep adding layers and layers and layers of new rules and process, we actually unintentionally protect the biggest companies because they're the only ones who can afford the consultants and the lawyers and the army of compliance people to navigate the regulatory environment. So we have to find ways to, yes, protect the environment, protect workers, but we have to keep it simple. Right now, many of our state agencies will require a small business to report the same data multiple times to 4 or 5 different agencies. There should be a single interface and what you might call a common app, if you remember from college applications. There should be a single portal to do that through. So we have to remember to manage the simplicity of the process to create more access for the small businesses that can't afford the army of consultants and lawyers. And we have to do the workshops and capacity building to actually give them real access. So sorry, I'm probably going into too much detail.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to up-level the second part of that question a little bit. So when dealing with small businesses, a big barrier, in addition to the complexity of the bureaucracy, other barriers are, one, that the agencies that are responsible for procurement are not being held accountable to those goals and standards. So
Yeah.
easily getting waivers, et cetera. And maybe that goes to a broader question around how to hold, as governor, the agencies that report up through you accountable for a variety of goals, including those equity-related goals, such as procurement support for small businesses and diverse businesses.
Yeah, and I appreciate you restating it. I mean, at the risk of oversimplifying it, I think it's making the equity goals explicit outcomes that matter and then creating consequences to hitting them or not, including tying funding to them. I think that's how you create accountability, is having a feedback loop that includes the state choosing to fund. And we've seen when the state wants to, it can put real teeth behind its policy goals when it wants to. For years, we had regional housing assessments that actually had no teeth and they didn't really matter. And I will give the Newsom administration real credit for starting to put some teeth behind it. Not everybody agrees with what they've done, but they've actually made the goals matter. And they've done things like say, if a city is a bad actor and doesn't comply, we will sue them, or we will just override and allow someone to build the housing by right. And the state does have the ability to strategically step in and create real accountability for those outcomes. So I guess what I would say is my commitment would be to bake those equity goals into procurement in a very real way and build in a feedback loop, meaning a consequence for local agencies that fail to take them seriously and progress toward them.
Great. If you could please introduce yourself.
My name is Pat Scott, and I've been involved in the housing business and building affordable housing, particularly in San Francisco. And it is, to put up 50 units of affordable housing, half for kids that aged out of foster care, took me 17 years. I mean, so it's not just, it is the lawsuits, it's the whole 9 yards. But I want to go back to Proposition 13. Until I heard you speak a little bit earlier, I was for let's just tax the big corporations. Can you please explain why that's not a good idea, if it's not a good idea?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. I'm sorry it took you, how many years did you say to build affordable housing?
17. 17 for 50 units.
That's ridiculous. I'm very sorry to hear that. Well, look, we should tax the big corporations, and I'm proud that we live in a state that has a very progressive tax structure. As you probably know, 40% of the tax revenue in the state comes from the top 1% of earners. The concern I have about unraveling Prop 13, and let me start with this. So there's been a lot of talk lately about Prop 13. I will start by saying we should acknowledge it is far from perfect. It is deeply unfair in some ways and distortionary. And it's not to say that we shouldn't look to reform it, but I want to make a couple of points on this. And just on the point about how unfair it is, I remember when my wife and I bought our home, first time we were homeowners, young family, just starting out, and I learned that we were paying 15 times the property tax of our neighbor. I was not too happy about that. On the other hand, I also acknowledge our neighbors who were retirees couldn't afford to pay much more. And so it isn't like a super simple, straightforward set of solutions here. Number one, for those who are arguing, as some of my opponents in this race are, that we'll just reform Prop 13 and have all of this additional revenue, I want to caution for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's not like when we passed Prop 13, California didn't go figure out how to capture tax revenue elsewhere. In fact, we passed the highest and most progressive income taxes in the country, the highest sales taxes, a number of business taxes and fees. And in fact, all in, when you look holistically at our taxes, we have the second highest tax burden in the country, which does translate into cost in many ways, which we should just acknowledge. So the idea that this is just a way to raise a bunch of new revenue, I would just question respectfully, because when we do that, we end up passing on costs. And so that gets to my second point. Those who point to examples of distortion, which I agree with, Disneyland isn't paying enough in property tax. It has been grandfathered in. And people point to the very obvious examples. Disneyland, Chevron, the golf course in Beverly Hills. Granted. But I would caution, because the estimated $30 billion bump in annual revenue that one of my opponents is touting as the answer to fund all of these things, like single payer and everything else that we want, which would not be, single payer is a $550 billion price tag for what it's worth. But the vast majority of that property tax increase will come from shopping centers, small office, large office with many tenants. And I hate to tell you this, but the truth is 90% of that increase will get directly passed on to the tenants, to the office holders, and to the consumers. And at some point, I'm not saying we can't find a revenue neutral way to make it fairer. And there are serious distortions. Prop 13 creates real issues that we ought to look at addressing. But at some point, we have to demand our government do better with the money we have before we ask for more. And I'll just go back to one of the things I started with. We're spending 75% more this year, $150 billion more this year than we were 6 years ago. And if your government can increase its spending at the state level by 75% and none of the outcomes get even 10% better, there's something more fundamental broken. And that's why I point out things like construction defect liability. Because when you have regulations that are twisted to serve special interests, you can pour as much money as you want in the system and you're not going to get better outcomes. And you see that on issue after issue in Sacramento, which is part of what motivated me to run, because we need to fix the policies and the regulations before we come back and say we're going to find a way to raise another $30 billion, which sadly will translate into another $30 billion of cost somewhere in our economy.
First of all, I hate to say this because it's a dirty word, but I'm a Republican. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been giving money to Act Blue, and I want to thank Matt Mahan, the mayor of San Jose. I have a lot of friends in San Jose. I'm Vietnamese, and he is fully healed from San Jose. We just met. But I want to say this: the elephant in the room tonight. All of the things that you said, but mostly it's about Trump. If California has to be independent, how the hell are we going to deal with this man who dismantled all the constitutional checks and balances?
Yeah.
And they will do damage. He will do damage. He and his henchmen to California. So I know we can talk about all these things about homelessness and housing for affordability, but I wager if we cannot stand as an independent state, then that will be the slippery slope of this whole country. And I want to say to our friend here, Taylor, I vote for you twice. Vote for you twice. But the last time I want to do all the housing, I've been running the thing, and you did not send it. You're too busy. But anyway, I'm glad that you were here. But
Thank you.
I also I am a school teacher, and I was with the. This is about our African American student of mine. I was a teacher. Let me finish. I was teaching in the high school, and there's a lot of students who commit crimes, and all I can tell them that I don't have the money to help you. You can make in one weekend that we have to do in a month, selling drugs and stuff. And that is the thing that I carry with me. And I now also teach at the Evergreen Valley College in San Jose in translation and interpretation.
Thank you.
So I can take a stab at maybe just quickly touching on those issues. I mean, look, you raise an issue that you're right, we absolutely need to talk about, which is Donald Trump being a threat to American values, to California explicitly, and what we do about it. And again, there are not easy answers, but I'll share with you a few of the tools we have. One is, as we've done in San Jose and as our state has done, we have to fight through the court system and use every legal tool to fight for our civil liberties, our constitutional rights, our fair share of funding. We have to really make the case for why this authoritarian impulse is dead wrong and why he doesn't fundamentally understand what makes America great, our civil liberties, our diversity, our status as an immigrant nation, an open and truly free country. And so so there's the courts, there's the bully pulpit and the power of storytelling. Trump's become very unpopular over his enforcement of immigration because Americans have had to start to confront what our government is doing to people. We have to humanize the folks he's hurting, whether it's ICE enforcement or HR 1 cuts, showing the impact of that. But there's a third tool here I want to point to, which is California is the best imaginable counterpoint to the MAGA movement, to Trump's values, when we are thriving. When we show that our values, our progressive values, work in practice. When we show we can deliver better outcomes, better education, more upward mobility, more opportunity in a beautifully diverse and inclusive state, that's the counterpoint. That's when we lead. That's when we have the moral authority and we become an aspirational place where families are moving to, not from. Which is why, yes, we can't just rely on resistance being lawsuits and speeches. It also has to be delivering results and proving that our values work better in practice and then telling that story. And I'm committed to making sure California leads in that way as well.
So my question is around the wealth gap. And curious to hear your thoughts on what your track record is and your plan as governor to address the wealth gap, particularly through entrepreneurship. I heard my elderly gentleman here mention that his students see more opportunity in selling drugs than they do in going the traditional path of education and finding a career. So how do you envision, and how have you done it already, addressing the wealth gap, especially through entrepreneurship?
Yeah, okay, great question. I'll set aside, because of the specific point of your question, that one of the biggest drivers of economic inequality are things like our lack of housing, high housing costs, and the fact that everybody's a renter. So we'll set that aside, right? I mean, but that's a big issue. If you can't get equity, if you can't buy, if you can't afford the rent, you see greater wealth. So that's a big underlying issue. Same with energy policy. Right now, the most regressive tax in California is the gas tax. Working families, rural families are paying 3.5 times more to maintain the roads than EV owners, who are disproportionately white, wealthy, higher educated. So no offense to the EV owners in the room, but you got to pay your fair share for fixing the roads. So part of it is looking at the underlying policies. A couple other things I'll note, and then we'll get to entrepreneurship as the unlock for people. The tax code. While I think that the proposed wealth tax is likely to have huge unintended consequences, there are other major loopholes in our tax code. And one that I've been very focused on that you may or may not be aware of is very wealthy individuals can endlessly borrow at a very low interest rate against their appreciated assets as a way to never pay capital gains on those appreciated assets. And so that should be closed. At some point, if you're borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars that you're then deploying and getting a return on against collateral that you've never paid a tax on, that should be a realized gain and you should pay the capital gains. Or the fact that Elon Musk can pass his entire $500 billion worth of appreciated stock in Tesla and SpaceX onto his kids, and at the moment of his death, it gets automatically reset to market rate, and they never, even if they sell it the next day, pay capital gains on the whole $500 billion worth of gains. These are real problems that exacerbate wealth inequality. You don't need to do a wealth tax and hire an army of assessors to go dig through people's lives and value their paintings to solve real deep inequities in our tax code. So that's an area I would focus. But you asked about entrepreneurship. I just want to point out that there's a lot of different ways to get at the wealth inequality in our country, from tax code to lowering the cost of housing and energy. But look, the job market's changing dramatically. Automation is coming. And we have to prepare for this future. And there are a lot of ways we can do that. In San Jose, we're funding apprenticeships where we will pay $25 an hour for someone to be in a job that they would otherwise not get hired into because they don't have the skill set. And then at the end of the year, the employer gets a yes or no on hiring them full time at full pay. 85% of people at the end of that year get hired full time into those jobs. That's a way to create a pathway to opportunity. One thing we've done in San Jose that could be a model for others has been turning our vacant storefronts into an opportunity for entrepreneurship. Not that every entrepreneurial enterprise will be a brick and mortar, but we've got hundreds and hundreds of vacant storefronts, all the more so since the pandemic. Well, we've partnered with landlords to give them incentives to reduce the rent for the first year or 18 months of a new tenant coming in. We've provided one-time storefront activation grants to help people move in, $10,000, $15,000 to move in. We've reduced fees on tenant improvements. We're speeding up tenant improvements and inspections to lower barriers to opening a new storefront and providing a lot of capacity building. We have another program, Mesa Redonda, that actually helps folks who have enterprises in their homes or in a food truck actually get their first brick and mortar. And we put them through a one-year incubator program where they're paired with an entrepreneur who's been through it before, who's being paid to basically be a coach or mentor. There are a lot of programs at a grassroots level that we can help communities deliver that actually give somebody the support they need to take that leap of entrepreneurship. But I'll also just note, having been an entrepreneur, I've run a small business and been a founder of one. I have to say, sometimes you feel like you're spending more time just following all the rules and regulations than running the business, which is why I come back to this thing that isn't super exciting to run on. It's not going to deliver a ton of votes, but if we don't reform the regulatory environment in California and reduce the litigation risk, it's going to be very hard to have an entrepreneurial society here. We've got codes and regulations, 430,000 of them in California. The next closest state is New York at 300,000. Texas has 200,000. Most states that are growing have 20 to 30,000, a tenth of the regulatory complexity of California. We've got so much litigation that tort cost in California is over $5,000 per household. Most of that tort law targeting small businesses. So we've got to really right-size that regulatory and litigious environment, which all starts with policy in Sacramento, if we're going to make it easier for people to start and run small businesses in our state.
And the last question is from Judy. Is Judy here? Can I read it out loud? Judy is asking, what can we do to reach the threshold needed in the next few weeks to overcome our crazy open primary?
Well, thanks. First of all, there's been a big concern that we're going to have 2 Republicans. Not going to happen, okay? We're going to be okay. Donald Trump decided to go endorse Steve Hilton, so he's going to go over 20%. And the other guy, Bianco's down at 10%, so Steve Hilton will possibly get through as the Republican, which means there's another slot. And I hope to earn your support. I'm not here to denigrate my opponents, but part of why I jumped in was I just genuinely listening to the field over the last year and knowing as the mayor of a big city and advocating a lot in Sacramento for solutions, I didn't see anyone else who I thought actually had a plan for fixing our real problems and holding Sacramento accountable for working with cities, counties, and school districts for really making meaningful and measurable progress on our biggest issues. reading, literacy rates, home building, opening up pathways for entrepreneurship, creating workforce development and economic development opportunities, the big underlying issues that create opportunity for everyone. And we believe if we get to 20%, we'll be in the top 2. And there is very much a path here. And I've been outspent 10-1 by one of my opponents, but there seem to be diminishing returns. And what we find is my biggest barrier is just name recognition. I'm really well known in San Jose and crushing it down there. I'm doing okay in the rest of the Bay, but you all could help a lot. I'm spending a lot of time in Southern California, the Central Valley, Sacramento, and all over. I'm on a plane every day. And what we find is that when people find out that, yeah, I'm not some tech bro from Silicon Valley. I grew up in a farming town, working class community, and really care about making the basics work for people. Economic opportunity, upward mobility, fixing those core issues. We shoot up in the polls. So there are a lot of ways to help. You can sign up on the website. You can put out a lawn sign or a window sign. You can chip in some dollars. You can tell your friends. At the end of the day, I think we're going to get in the top 2 through word of mouth. I think it's going to be people. I'm doing these events all day, every day with different groups of people all over the state. And if you each just go talk to 5 or 10 friends, we're going to be in the top 2.
So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everyone for coming out, being such an engaged audience. Oakland showed up tonight. I hope everyone is more informed going forward. I think ballots get mailed out in 3 weeks. Mailed out, so people will be receiving their ballots that quickly. That means there's not a lot of time. If you liked what you heard, you heard ways to get involved. There are folks wearing Matt Mahan t-shirts all around. So take the knowledge that you have here, go out, spread the word. And Mayor Mahan, thank you for being here, prioritizing Oakland.